Hi, Shara. So thank you for agreeing to talk to me today. We're coming from two different perspectives. I'm a UK social worker and you're over in America. So it's great to have you with me today.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be on your podcast. And it's also just so lovely to talk to another social worker in another country. So, I mean, you said it's 8 o'clock. We are
Yeah,
3 o'clock in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I am. So I'm very excited to have a conversation and thank you for inviting me. For us, it kind of has different levels.
hmm
Um, if you don't want to be a therapist, then you're a case manager or you're in advocacy or you're working in the government, or you're a professor. There's like micro, meso levels to social work and even macro. So micro is working with individuals, families, and groups. Of course, you have macro practice, which you're working more with institutions or government agencies. And then there's meso practice, which is kind of in the middle. But therapy is one aspect if the social worker decides to go into mental health. That was my background. I did 20 years in a mental health setting across a variety of different experiences I had in a hospital setting as a therapist. And then I worked as a medical case manager, worked as a HIV case manager, worked in various capacities that were not directly therapy that may have had clinical
yeah,
mental health implications to it. But some social workers don't become therapists at all. They just end up doing more case management advocacy work, or they're in the government, or they're in private practice. So it varies here depending on what the person's interest is.
that's interesting. Yeah. So what are some of the sort of similarities and differences you've noticed from UK and US social work?
I would probably have to say when it comes to licensing requirements, here is pretty strict. And it varies by state. So here, once you get a master level, well, we'll start from the bachelor level. For us, the bachelor level social work license, most social workers have to get that in order to start getting more opportunities presented to them. Then there, for the master level social workers, you get your master level license in most states, and that pre-qualifies you for 3,000 hours to be supervised underneath a clinical social worker who has their advanced independent license. And then from there, 2 years later, you sit for your exam. And that's in most states, not all states. I know California, Chicago, um, and I believe there's one more I can't think of. Some states are now kind of pulling back those requirements. Right now, there's a big fight in the U.S. When it comes to licensing,
hmm
just because our board, ASWB, has came out with a report. They're the regulatory board for our licensing requirements, and they came out with a report saying that it's um, systematically has some underpinnings there that the people that don't pass their exams are they're usually people of color,
Oh, okay.
people who have been out of school a very long time, so older test takers, as well as people that have a English as their second language. Um,
hmm
Historically, there's been a lot of systemic reasons why the test it doesn't it just has a big barrier implication for social workers, and there's a shortage in some areas around the country here
hmm
for social work because of the licensing requirements. So that's the
Right.
big thing right now
hmm
um, when it comes to the licensing. And I'm not sure how it is where you are, but here the licensing really for us is it's the freedom that we get to practice independently once we no longer have to be under supervision of someone that has a independent clinical license. So here
Right.
we have
Okay.
different levels depending on the degree.
Yeah. So, well, people have to have a degree or a master's qualification in order to qualify and work as a social worker. Then when they have to register, so I'm in England, so register with Social Work England, um,
Mm.
and so there's different schemes to get on, so like apprenticeships and things, and usually people have to do ASYE year, so a year in practice,
Okay.
and continue to sort of do things, do sort of reports and reflective practice throughout that year. So it's 2 or 3 years really to do it, and then you're a qualified social worker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So no
So
testing requirements, more practice-based experience.
there's yeah, you have to go through the degree. So there's tests and exams in legislation, and then you have to do loads of assignments and things. There's also,
Okay.
you have placements as well. So I did a 70-day and a 100-day placement, and then we had to do that in order to qualify. And then when you're in practice, then you continue to sort of work on your CPD, and then be observed as a newly qualified social worker as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think
That's
the pay,
interesting.
I think the pay is better in America from what I've seen, to the
Uh,
UK.
it's funny because there are people here that will say otherwise.
Oh, really?
It it ranges. So for a bachelor level social worker starting out, it's about maybe 30, 40 grand in some places. Um, I mean, I've been in social for about 20 years. So back then, a bachelor, you weren't making much money. I went straight back to school for my master's degree right after. Back then, I would say 2010, master's degree in Washington, D.C., which is where I was about $40,000 without license. Once I got licensed with the master's, it was about 50,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, 50 and up. With the clinical license, 60,000 and up. So it ranges from 60,000 to 100,000, depending on your level of experience, as well as having the terminal license and degree.
Right, okay. Yeah, you don't get that much. I know it's different, in terms of how it
But in terms
translates,
of people
but
saying, like, people here would say, hey, $30,000 is not a lot of money. Like coming out of school, there's a lot of social workers that they fight for equal pay in comparison to their
oh
living
yeah, yeah.
expenses.
Really, I think it's about 28 on the lower end, but I don't know if I think social workers are in demand, so it's different across the country. It's like the lower end, and then I'd say like up to 40 really. But I'd have to get the exact figures. I'm gonna put that in on the video and just afterwards. Um, but it sounds like there's more sort of um ways you can progress then in terms of your pay, whereas in the UK I feel like you have to get into management in order to go up quite significantly in your pay. It feels a bit capped.
Okay.
I think for a lot of people feel like it should be maybe reflected in terms of your experience, to get paid more rather than just management being your only route. So
Okay. When I was looking at some of the differences in terms of, you kind of already talked about the education training piece, like in the UK,
yeah,
it's completing a bachelor's master's degree, which is approved by Healthcare Professionals Council, HCPC.
yeah.
So
Well,
that's
it
for you
it
guys.
was it was
It
HCPC.
was.
It's now Social Work
Uh,
England, but yeah,
okay. Here for us, it's the bachelor's degree is the minimum degree that we need, and for us it's the master's that we need in order to progress, and it's a national exam that we all have to pass.
hmm
Now the changes have been that there's a license requirement in some states, not all, for the bachelor's, most states for the master's, and all states for the clinical. The regulatory bodies are very different.
hmm
So here the regulatory body licensing boards by state vary in terms of what they require. I know for your board, it's just regulated by just what that one entity that you
hmm
mentioned, right?
yeah,
Your focus areas is also different. So, from what I just read, UK social workers often work with child and family services, mental health, and services for the elderly, with an emphasis on any national health services and local
hmm
authorities. Is that
yeah,
correct? So for us, it like I said, it ranges depending on
yeah,
what the person's interest: child welfare, school social work, medical social work, public or private organizations that we can work for, sectors. So that part varies. It seems like at least here in America, there's a lot more options maybe in mobility.
Yeah. Because you were saying about some of your sort of roles.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it does sound quite interesting, like the specialisms and things that you've had.
Yeah. They for me, the variety and experiences. I mean, I started out trying to think back now. I started out with just a general bachelor's in social work degree. I knew I was going to go back for a master's because I knew that I would literally need that degree in order to not only make any money, but to have more doors open for me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so getting the master's and not waiting for many years later, like many of my colleagues have. Um, when I was young, I graduated my master's at the age of 24. So here, if you have a bachelor's in social work, you can get your master's within a year. I
Okay.
did mine
Oh,
in
right.
3 semesters. We call it advanced standing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a lot quicker, really, because it takes 2 years to get a master's on top
Hmm.
of, yeah, the degree. Because I've actually got a master's, not in social work specifically. It's just a professional development master's, and I just built it up from doing a few different modules. It took me a good few years though, because I did it in sort of like a piecemeal thing, and like
Okay.
sort of developing myself as part of my day-to-day practice as well, doing sort of on the job parts to it. So that was quite good. But I don't really feel, I think a lot of people do masters here because they have to be a social worker. I don't think many people really do it to progress in their career. Not many. I felt like I was one of the few that had sort of continued to do that. There's a lot of people that do sort of CPD modules in order to have a different aspect to their role. So for example, I'm a practice educator, so I take students as part of my role, and I had to do extra training to do that.
Wow.
A
Okay.
lot of people do that sort of thing. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's been a good overview really of some of the differences.
As I was just thinking, another one was talking about the like besides the focus areas, some of the challenges. So for you guys, it's like high caseload. There's sometimes bureaucratic constraints and balancing resource limitations with client needs.
Yeah.
For us, it's more of dealing with diverse populations, addressing a wide range of social issues, navigating a complex healthcare system. Um, so similar, but we do face high caseloads here and sometimes resource constraints depending on the agency that we're
Yeah.
working for. Yeah, so we do get that every once.
Well,
So
I suppose especially like the healthcare system is just completely different, isn't it? So
yes, 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 it is. It's a mess.
what's it
Uh,
actually like having people that obviously just won't be able to afford healthcare in some places?
um, it's hard because it's a very complex it can be a very complex system. It's not like in some countries where there's like a people don't have health insurance. Everyone gets it. Here, no, it's really it seems like the people that can afford to get care do, and the people that are not able to get care are not able to, or if they do have state insurance, sometimes it can be limited
Mhm.
to the resources that can get. Now, this is not in all parts of the country, but especially when it comes to mental health, it's still very much inaccessible to some people, even though we have telemental health here, telehealth. That's been very innovative, especially during the pandemic. There's still a lot of stress on the healthcare system, especially when people don't have access to care.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a really big I'm trying to like keep it like it's a it's a really big topic here when it comes to healthcare and some of the disparities that are still there.
Yeah.
Um,
And then in terms of caseloads, yeah, I think quite a lot of the time it is unmanageable for social workers. And there are a lot of social workers that are finding that they actually don't feel that they can do their role effectively because of it, or they don't feel
mhm,
like in teams maybe that in under-resourced, or they don't have enough social workers to actually manage the work, and retention's quite low. I think that some social workers are happy and feel supported in the roles, but then some people are having to move from role to role really quickly because of
Mhm.
structural issues. How would you say social workers are as a whole? Do they feel happy in their roles, or do you think that there's issues
Not
with the retention and things as well?
there. Yeah, there. I think that's probably when when you're dealing. It's a high stress level environment at times, and it can cause what we call here compassion fatigue, burnout.
Yeah,
What I like to call the killer of social work. When you get to a point where, in comparison to your other healthcare counterparts, sometimes not feeling like you have the support that you need, it can definitely have an impact on how you provide services to others. I've had times in my career where I've experienced burnout.
hmm,
In my last role as a therapist, I love my colleagues, I love the job itself, but there are definitely parts of the system that um, definitely set up barriers, and even exacerbated stress for providers that were trying to give help to the people that they were serving. High caseload, high expectation documentation, coming in on the weekends, mountains
yeah,
of paperwork that seemed
hmm,
endless, changing regulatory policies around documentation. It got to be pretty stressful at
yeah,
times when it came to those parts, from what I remember being in that type of environment. But
yeah,
in overall, in terms of the experience, of the clinical experience I got, is was to me exactly what I needed to learn how to deal with different diagnoses. I mean, I in the time that I was in the hospital, it was like 8 years of dealing with patients that were dually diagnosed, pretty challenging backgrounds, but it gave me a lot of rich context, a lot of rich clinical experience. I walked out of there about 23 specializations and a lot of good experience. If I
hmm.
wanted to go into private practice, I loved being a therapist, but I'm definitely not, I haven't been in practice for about since 2019.
Right,
So,
okay. Yeah.
yeah.
So what are you sort of doing now then? Now that you've moved out of that?
Um, Sorry, my AirPods
Oh no,
fall
don't
out
worry.
sometimes. So I always have to, like, 'cause my skin is very oily, so it's like I have to put
Oh
it back.
yeah, get it fixed then.
um, yeah, yeah. So to make sure they don't fall out. So right now what I do is I'm a LinkedIn advisor. I'm also I help with helping social workers pass their boards. I have my own private coaching company that helps bachelor's and master in clinical social workers pass their boards. I also do clinical supervision remotely, and I also provide professional development for social workers. So
Brilliant.
that's what I do. I've been doing that for the past, it'll be 3 years in January. Yeah. And
And
I also do podcasting, and I'm also
amazing.
an
So
author. So there's
yeah,
that.
yeah, I saw the you do well on Amazon. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was I wrote two journals. One, I wrote them back to back within 3 months of each other. I have ADHD, so it's like I can get hyper focused on a project, knock it
brilliant.
out.
Yeah.
Um, and now I kind of like, when am I going to write a book? I don't even know. Because when I wrote
Yeah.
them, um, they were birthed out of my decade-long journey of trying to get to the clinical license. It took me a decade. Here, it takes only 2 years, 3,000 hours. It took me 10 years.
Oh right, okay.
Um, yeah, because of life and
Yeah.
having children, getting married, and really struggling with my own mental health while trying to provide, go through single motherhood at one point, raising a child that was medically compromised. Um, Going through a military divorce and navigating and rebuilding my career again. So it took me some time to kind of find my space again.
Hmm.
The job that I was at as a psychotherapist was pretty much an anchoring space for me while I tried to just figure out my life professionally and personally at the time.
Yeah.
So the two journals that were birthed were during the midst of my depression when I missed my clinical exam by 2 points the first time.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So when I wrote those journals, they were two old notebooks of prayers and affirmations I would tell myself. Because when the pandemic hit, I was out of a job, I was at home. I really couldn't do much except take care of the kids and make sure they were
Mhm,
okay. Um, didn't even study at that time. I kind of just took a break
mhm.
until 8 months later, got back on my feet to say, hey, I'm going to try this again. Took the exam and passed it and birthed my company shortly after. But those two books were a reflection of a mindset that I needed to cultivate at the time. And when I released them, they became the first one, 90 Days of Prayer, became a 5-time Amazon bestseller. And that's
Yeah,
a couple months later, 90 Days of Inspiration came out, and that was a bestseller as well. But they were
amazing.
both a part of my journey to really tell other social workers, okay, now I'm done with this part of my journey. It's your turn now. So it is a way of trying to leave a little bit of my journey with someone else to keep them pushing because of licensing requirements here are hard.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people have jobs and they're, learning how to be students again. And it's hard when you have children or when you have a disability. I've coached a couple of different clients that had some really debilitating conditions, a TBI, a client that was deaf,
Mhm.
a client who was blind on my podcast who passed her
Okay.
master
Mhm.
level license the first time. So it's people that have had debilitating anxiety, like I have, ADHD and other cognitive or neurological disorders,
Yeah,
need a more holistic approach, and that's what I provide to them.
brilliant.